That was take 10 of the original version of Surfin' Safari, minus a lead guitar overdub, recorded in February of 1962. The group would later re-record the song in April of '62 when they signed to Capitol Records. But these early recordings for Height and Dorinda Morgan have long fascinated hardcore Beach Boys fans. Well, Omnivore Recordings' new 2-disc set, Becoming the Beach Boys, now offers us more of this material than we've ever heard before, and in much better sound quality. Beach Boys historian James B. Murphy joins me right now on our Beach Boys Bash. His 2015 book, Becoming the Beach Boys, is one of the best books about the group ever written. And it provided the title for this new compilation, and Jim wrote the liner notes. Jim, it's a great pleasure to have you back.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be back on the show.
If you could, I'd like to ask you to give us a thumbnail sketch of who Height and Dorinda Morgan were and why these recordings are so significant.
Sure. Between September of 1961 and March of 1962, the Beach Boys recorded 9 songs at 4 different recording sessions for a husband and wife couple by the name of Height and Dorinda Morgan. They were in their late 40s, and they lived in Los Angeles, and they had a demo studio set up in their living room, which was pretty good, with a recording lathe and microphones and piano and guitars and a whole recording studio basically set up in their living room, where they would make demo recordings, and that's where they would try out various artists. And they had been doing that since actually the early 1940s, when they first arrived in Los Angeles from Georgia, by way of New York, actually. And basically artists and struggling singers, songwriters would go to the Morgans and record a demo record and then use that as a calling card. And in the early 1950s, the Morgans befriended Murray Wilson, Brian, Dennis, and Carl's father. And, of course, Murray was a not a singer, a songwriter, I should say, and had some success with a couple of his tunes. I'll Hide My Tears by the Jets on Aladdin,
right,
and then also Two-Step, Sidestep, it was recorded by a number of different people. So Murray befriends Height and Dorinda Morgan, and then in 1961, when the boys have Surfin' and they want to kind of make their own record of it, they make a demo of Surfin' in the Morgans' living room studio, and then they record 2 other songs at that demo session, Luau, which was written by Dorinda Morgan as a potential B-side to Surfin', and then another song called Lavender, which Dorinda Morgan had written back in 1955, and it was recorded in June of 1958 by the Calvains, an R&B group, but never released. So Dorinda sort of dusts Lavender off, and the Beach Boys record a version of Lavender at this demo session as well. And then a couple of weeks later, probably in early November of 1961, Height Morgan and Dorinda Morgan take the group now known as the Pendletones, actually. They were still kind of calling themselves the Pendletones, back into a studio. And this is where it gets a little interesting. The studio was always thought to believe that it was World Pacific Studio on West 3rd Street in L.A., but there's more and growing anecdotal evidence that it might have been Stereo Masters on Melrose Avenue that the Morgans owned. Regardless, they go back into the studio and they make more polished recordings of Surfin', Luau, and Lavender. And then in very late November of 1961, the Beach Boys' first single is released, and that's Surfin', and it's paired with Luau, and that comes out on Candix Enterprises, a small independent label in L.A., and it was Candix 331, which was the first Beach Boys single. But these sessions, the complete Height and Dorinda Morgan sessions, released by Omnivore Recordings back on August 26th, it has all of these 9 recordings, every single master take, every incomplete take, every false start, studio chatter in between the songs, some conversation between the guys and Height Morgan in the control booth. So it's every second of the tapes that still exist.
I'll tell you, one of the best aspects of this new release for me was listening to all the different versions of Lavender. Those lush Beach Boys harmonies are sort of missing on early songs like Surfin', but you can definitely hear what they later became famous for on Capitol in this collection.
You certainly can, and that was, that's kind of like the gem of the collection, I think, because, for most Beach Boys fans, Lavender was only first heard in 1991 when Steve Hoffman of DCC Compact Classics had remastered some of their tapes and basically released selected versions from the Height Morgan sessions. And that CD was called Lost and Found on DCC Compact Classics, and Beach Boy fans were extremely excited to get that back in 1991. Now, that's been 25 years, actually, since Lost and Found came out. But that's the first time we heard Lavender. And that was a revelation because, first of all, it was a brand-new Beach Boys song. It was a 20-year-old Brian Wilson, singing this beautiful, lush ballad. And all the vocal harmony stock was already in place. He already knew what he was doing. It was already proof of his self-education of studying the Four Freshmen records and breaking down, their songs bar by bar, going from his phonograph player to his piano and back and forth, lifting the needle, dropping the needle, going back to the piano and deciphering these complex jazz chords and harmonies. So Lavender was just a revelation.
She waits.
Just beautiful. We're talking with Beach Boys author and expert James B. Murphy. The new CD is called Becoming the Beach Boys. I should say it's a 2-CD set. You know what else I noticed on this collection? You hear Brian very tentatively asserting himself in the studio.
Yeah, Brian, he's doing an early version of Surfer Girl. To pick up on my earlier chronology, Surfin' reaches number 3 in L.A. and reaches number 75 in Billboard. And it could have probably gone higher nationally, but Candix had a lot of distribution problems and a lot of financial problems. So on February 8th, 1962, the Morgans take the guys back into the studio. And this time we know for sure it's World Pacific because there's a AFM contract, the American Federation of Musicians. There's an actual contract dated February 8th, 1962. And they record 4 songs that night, Surfin' Safari, Surfer Girl, Judy, and Beach Boys Stomp, looking for the all-important follow-up single. And what's interesting about that session is here's a song like Surfin' Safari and Surfer Girl. So they had 2 future, big Beach Boy hits
sure.
in that session, and yet a follow-up single is not forthcoming. So at that session, when they're recording Surfer Girl, you can hear Brian asking Height Morgan, "Hey, Height, can I sing first? Can I just concentrate on my vocals, and then maybe we can overdub my bass guitar later?" And then Height from the control booth comes back with a rather commanding, almost semi-annoyed tone in his voice when you hear it on the tapes, and he just says, "No," and then Brian whispers to Mike, I think, like, "What'd he say?" And it's like, he said no. But already Brian he knows that, well, let me just concentrate on my vocal first, and then I'll play the bass later, and we'll overdub it. So already he knows that the capability of doing that. And, of course, he's been doing that for years on his Wallensack reel-to-reel tape recorder that Murray and Audrey, his parents, bought for him back in, I think, 1958 for his 16th birthday. So he's been making these little, home recordings and overdubbing on his own reel-to-reel stereo system back at home. So he knows the capability of doing that. But the kind of simple, somewhat rudimentary production approach that night wouldn't really allow for him to expand as much as he wanted to.
You mentioned the song Surfer Girl. One of the most intriguing moments on this collection is a version of Surfer Girl that features what sounds like a woman singing on the bridge. Do we have any idea why that happened, whose decision that was, or who that woman is?
That's an interesting thing, actually. When Brad Rosenberger, the co-owner and co-partner of Omnivore Recordings, when he and I were speaking, back earlier this summer and spring, and listening to the recordings and trying to figure out who that is, a couple of things that came to mind is we're not really sure that it's a woman. I think there's a very, very good chance that it's a guy with a very, very high voice. Now, the other name on the AFM contract, the only one that's not a Beach Boy, is a fellow by the name of Val Paluto. And Val Paluto was a member of the Jaguars, one of the first racially balanced groups R&B groups back in the late 50s. And he was a good friend of the Morgans, and Height would use him on lots of sessions. He could play keyboards, and he was a drummer, and he was a singer. But I've listened to some of his other recordings that he did with the Jaguars, and to my untrained, non-audiophile ears, it doesn't sound like the same voice. But that was the first person I thought of because he is on the AFM contract, and Height used him on a lot of various sessions. But I can't prove that it is him. But even the gender of the vocalist is still somewhat up in the air.
Maybe it is a guy singing on the bridge. Boy, this is turning into the biggest Beach Boys mystery of 2016. Who the heck is that? Jim, before we let you go, I think we should address the Kenny and the Cadets mystery. Now, there are two songs that feature some of the Beach Boys, Barbie and What Is a Young Girl Made Of, issued as Kenny and the Cadets. It's my understanding that the Beach Boys don't actually play on these tracks, and that these are songs that Dorinda Morgan had lying around.
Correct. Dorinda Morgan had written both of the songs, actually. She wrote Barbie for the Barbie doll, which had been introduced in 1960 by the Mattel toy company, which coincidentally was based in Hawthorne, California, which is where the Beach Boys came from primarily. And then she had also written a song called What Is a Young Girl Made Of? And they were both earmarked for another artist whose name, history and time is forgotten. But the instrumental tracks were already done for both songs. And then probably around March of 1962. So this is after Surfin' Safari, and Surfer Girl, and the early sessions that the Morgans did with the Beach Boys. It's believed that Haidt and Dorinda asked Murray if he would have the boys come down to the studio and put down their vocals for both of these songs. So for Barbie, you have Brian Wilson singing, Carl Wilson singing, Al Jardine, who actually had left the group by that point. He leaves the group around mid-February of 1962. But for this March session for the Barbie and What Is a Young Girl Made Of, Al comes back in to lend his voice to the vocal mix. And then also the Wilson brothers' mother, Audrey Wilson, is on that record. So we've got Brian, Carl, Al Jardine, and Audrey Wilson singing on Barbie. And then on the flip side, what becomes the flip side of this single that does get released on Randy 422 is What Is a Young Girl Made Of? And it's just Brian singing. And there is a chorus in the background. It's a female chorus. And again, their names, time and history has just simply forgotten. But the instrumental track was already laid down for the B-side as well. And then the female chorus was there too. So Brian sings to that. And then as a little bonus track that Brad Rosenberger found on the tapes is this demo of What Is a Young Girl Made Of? And it's just a piano demo of a guy singing, and it's a very, very different arrangement of the song. And some people have actually almost prefer it. Brian's vocal is beautiful on the song. But the song is very saccharine and very, very old-fashioned, I guess, kind of thing. And the demo has a little bit more of a grit to it, actually. But we don't know who that demo singer is. And again, the name that always comes to my mind is Val Paluta, but I can't prove it, and I can't say for sure. But when the Wilson brothers and Jardine and Audrey lay down their vocals for Barbie, and then Brian sings the lead for What Is a Young Girl Made Of, Haidt says, okay, well, we've got two songs here. We've got the A-side, we've got the requisite B-side, and they go ahead and press it on a one-shot label, Randy Records. And Randy was a kind of a good-natured poke or a wink of the eye to Randy Woods of Dot Records.
Oh, okay.
And Haidt Morgan was very, very good friends with Randy Wood of Dot Records. So that's where the Randy record comes from. And 422 was a common trick by little independent record companies back then. They would never number a record like 100 or 101 because it would signal to the disc jockeys and the program directors that this was a brand new record company just getting off the ground. And why should we pay them any attention? So they always gave their releases a higher numerical number kind of thing to make it seem that, if this is 422, well, there must be a 421 and a 420 and a 419. It must be a long line of releases from this record company, which was not the case at all. And there is no significance that I was able to find for 422. People have theorized that it was April 22nd, but that's not true at all. It's not true at all.
Now, if you were to go to a Brian Wilson show and for the encore, he came out and sang What Is a Young Girl Made Of? You'd probably fall out of your seat, I'm sure.
I think I would not be the only one. You'd probably hear a lot of chairs folding over and collapsing. Yeah. That would be going perhaps too deep into the Beach Boys catalog.
Right. Well, anyway, folks, we've been talking to Jim Murphy. Of course, he's the author of the book Becoming the Beach Boys, and he also wrote the liner notes for this Omnivore Recordings release, which just came out a few weeks back, a month back at this point, called Becoming the Beach Boys. Jim, if you could tell us where we can get the CD and where people can still pick up copies of your book.
OmnivoreRecordings.com, their website, and they have a really nice website, and you can kind of scroll through their entire discography. They've got over 200 releases, and they do some really great CDs, great music. I've got a lot in my collection myself, so you can get it directly from Omnivore at their website. You can also order it from Amazon.com, and my book you can get from Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and directly from my publisher, McFarland Books, out of Jefferson, North Carolina.
Thanks so much, Jim. Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you so much for having me back on the show.
When is the young girl